Hi. Do you think that your stepchildren's difficult, objectionable or awkward behaviour is due to what's happened in their past and it's affecting your life going forward now? I post once a week, so subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell and I'll let you know every time I post. There is one phenomenon inside stepfamilies which is less prevalent in other family types, and that is families dealing with grief. Almost by definition, a stepfamily is formed by loss or as a result of loss. It doesn't matter whether or not it's a bereavement and somebody's died, or whether or not it's a marriage that's split up, or even if it's not even that, even if it's moving out of one home to start another family somewhere else in another home. It's about, for the children particularly, it's about loss. For the two adults in the relationship, that's not the case, because they have found each other and are excited about forming a couple and moving on. And with moving on comes huge bursts of motivation and energy. Mountains seem completely superable. There's nothing you can't do. Your enthusiasm is right there. But for children, particularly in a family environment where a couple are moving on like that and a step family is forming, you are very normally, as a step parent, dealing with grief. So much so that I would recommend that you buy yourself some books on grief. Grief for children, what to do, how to help them through it. These kinds of aids can help enormously understand the plight, and I'll call it the plight, of a child dealing with grief. The grief can explain so much of a normal stepchild's behaviour. So when you think about stepchildren and how difficult they can be. Now, it can be that they are reluctant to participate in things. They're kind of not enthusiastic. They are very difficult to persuade. They are grumpy. They are angry. They're quite moody. They are quite anxious. They have fears that are unrealistic. There's all sorts of behaviours that step parents complain about quite normally, and this is reasonably unique to step families. So if you're getting any of these kinds of behaviours, the other behaviours are things like regression and children sort of retreating to a little place where they might have felt safe before. You can almost sometimes pinpoint the developmental stage of a child, for example, when their mother or father died, to how they're behaving at the moment. So if they regress to being like a 3-year-old, think to yourself, did their parents die when they were 3? If they are behaving like a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, you can go back, you can sort of think, God, their behaviour is just like a much younger child of about such and such an age. And that often you can pinpoint the trauma happening then. And I say trauma, I mean loss. And with loss can often come trauma, but even if it's not trauma, it's a kind of stage which you've got to be able to move on from and often can't. So many of the normal stepchild behaviours of being unpleasant to a step-parent, ignoring them, disagreeing with them, being objectionable, all stem from the same kinds of bereavement behaviours that can happen. Now, I don't know when you were last bereaved or last suffered a loss, but we all suffer them, and it's not something we can really escape in life. So it's about helping the child to cope with their loss, but also to be respectful of what they're going through, because they are at a completely different life stage to you. You are at the forming of a relationship with a golden future ahead of you, or so you hope. But that is a completely different life stage to having to cope with loss. When you're coping with loss, you're feeling very unenergetic, very down, very unsocial, very reluctant to get involved in anything. It's a stage when you often quite want to isolate yourself, just to sort of, before you can sort of garner the energy to move on again. You just want to stabilise yourself. Think back to when you last experienced loss. It's not an easy time to go through at all. And this is what we see. And it's just one example is, if you're having you've put on a fantastic day for your stepchildren, and you may be on holiday, or you may have planned something, and you're really hoping that the children can enjoy it. After all, you've put a lot of energy into it, and you're hoping they'll be gracious recipients of it, and also appreciative, and it'll grow a warmth between you. But it's very difficult if you see a new partner with your parent. The only thing you can often think about is what it would have been like for your other parent to be there instead of you, the step-parent. It's really hard, especially when you see the new person with your other parent that used to be with your other parent. It's really hard. It's difficult to see the step-parent handling things that used to be handled by their parent. From personal experience, I remember having a real watershed moment when I remember my stepmother getting the high chair down from the attic because she had some friends coming for lunch that had a young child, and my father had said, "Oh, get the high chair out of the attic," and she was there and she was wiping it and washing it, and I looked at her and I thought, oh no, that's my mum's gone, and this isn't the same, and all those thoughts about my mother came flooding back into my head. It simply didn't matter what my stepmother did. She couldn't have rescued me from those thoughts or feelings. And it's, however buoyant or cajoling or humorous or however involving she was, or kind or gentle to me at that time, I was just wrapped up in my loss. And it's one of those things that can really affect a relationship. So what do you do when you think you're managing with children who are suffering loss? Well, one of the first things to realise is that the problem is not about you. You might be a projected focus of their unhappiness, in the sense that they sort of pick you out to do the bad behaviour with. But actually, This is about their grief and they're getting over the change that's happened in their lives. It's not about you necessarily. And one of the most helpful things you can do is not to take it personally. It isn't that they dislike you. It's they're stuck in a situation and their behaviour is trying to tell you something. I always think it's helpful to look at somebody's behaviour and say, what is that behaviour trying to tell me? And if you take that approach to this problem, that can help you not take it personally. A second thing which is supposed to be very helpful is to highlight that you're not trying to take their parent's place, whether that parent be deceased or whether or not it just there's been a divorce and that you're now their other parent's partner. It's the same, but either way, it can be helpful to have a conversation about what role the child feels that you have, but also to say to the child that although you're here and that you're having to do various things, you don't see yourself as taking their other parent's place. You can be another sort of co-parent, but not trying to replace or forget about the parent that's been in that position before. They say that grief takes time, and if you allow time, things will get better. Well, that could be the reason why it can take so long for a step family to gel, because it takes a much longer time than you expect. Everybody says so. Some people says it takes at least 4 years. Some people say it takes 7 years. And some people say it takes a decade, 10 years before you feel like a family. And I would fully endorse that. To expect the family to gel before is difficult. And I say in 10 years' time, you will begin to feel like a family. You may feel like a family a bit before the 10 years, but my guideline is it's 10 years. Now, one of the reasons why it may take 10 years, or at least a long time, it's when you've moved to a different stage that you can leave the past behind you. So, for example, if the child is under the age of 10, then it may take until they're in their teens before they accept you and things are normal again and they're prepared to sort of integrate and move on. It's because they've moved on in their lives and their life is no longer the same one that they had when you were trying to form as a step family. Same with older children. If they're in their teens, I say it takes until they're in their 20s before you've moved on to a different stage. Everybody's doing a different thing. Everybody's matured a lot more. And that is when the family can then gel. Now, one other thing. It's all very well to say that time will heal. And I say that time can help. But I also think that grief and getting over loss is also a process. Time in itself will not do it. I've seen lots of people stuck in a time warp where they cling to their old beliefs forever. I always think that processing grief is more about coming to terms with it, internalizing it. So you don't say goodbye to whatever was there before. You acknowledge it. You celebrate it. It was what it was. So it's not about trying to forget or get rid of or pretend it didn't happen. It's about putting the story of your life into some kind of context so it makes sense. So, up until the age of 10, I lived with my mummy and daddy, and then they decided to divorce, but actually my life is good now as well, because for the following reasons. I've got a bonus parent and I've got two parents who are much happier, or whatever the story is. But it's kind of like you've got to, in some way, speak. It helps to speak it out, but you process it so you can make sense of it and you can be content with it, and that is your life. And in that process, as a step parent, you can sometimes be helpful on that child's journey to be able to make sense of what happened in their lives to date and put it all into some kind of context for them. And that will help them move on. Because step families are a lot about loss before you can move on. We run workshops, have sessions, have an email response service, and write booklets. Take a look at the description box below for links to our social media and website.